Anyone hoping for a better grade in their GCSE English this summer, tough. You're stuck with your results, even though we now know that 6 months before, you'd have had an easier ride. The exam regulators admit GCSEs were marked less generously than in January, but they're not about to do anything to placate students or teachers.
It makes a mockery of the league tables. They become meaningless unless you actually know when a school entered children for the English GCSE.
The chief regulator at OFQUAL will try to explain why it's OK that some students got lucky. The exam regulator has dashed hopes that English GCSEs from this summer might be revisited, despite a huge outcry over thousands of students in England who did worse than expected. OFQUAL admitted today that June's exams were marked more harshly than the same exam taken in January, but effectively said that's life. The January candidates simply got a lucky break. The problem is that thousands of 16-year-olds are seeing their plans for the future thrown into the balance and are wishing they'd been in that small percentage who'd gone into the exams just 6 months earlier. Sancha Berg reports.
In the row over GCSE grading, today was the turn of the exam regulator to offer its submission and answer question 1. What, if anything, had gone wrong?
The job we have to do is to make sure that standards are maintained and standards are right. We know that that was the case in June. We can see that in January there was a level of generosity. A very small number of students there got a lucky break.
No lucky break at Burlington Danes, one of the Education Secretary's favourite academies. Students took the exam in June. The school's senior teachers saw the number getting 5 good GCSEs, including English and Maths, fall from 75% last year to 64%.
I'm not in a position to judge whether or not the grade boundaries were too generous in January. All I know is that it's not fair. I felt sick actually when I got the results. I was so shocked. On the day the English results came in, I can really remember my feeling on that day when D after D after D came out on the results. I couldn't believe it. We were in a total state of shock.
For the first time since 1988, the percentage of pupils getting A* to C in English language fell from 65.4% to 63.9% this summer. This year's English GCSE was a new exam, part marked in schools, part by exam boards. In March, it emerged that to get a C grade on the AQA foundation paper that some students sat in January required 43 marks. Teachers worked on this basis. Then last week, we learned that that boundary had shifted for the June exams, up to 53 marks, and boundaries were raised for coursework too and by other boards.
We're quite happy with grade boundaries changing between years, but not within the same year. I think that's been the issue, and it's been particularly with the controlled assessments or the work done in school, where a piece of work is worth a C in January and a D in June. So that's where it seems completely unfair.
And that's for exactly the same piece of work.
And it's exactly the same piece of work.
And I think it is important to be clear that as a school we want to raise standards and we want exams to become more difficult, more rigorous exam criteria. What we strive for is for students to do better and better. However, it just feels that you're differentiating between a point of entry, and if a child was entered in January, as many schools did do early entry, they're going to achieve much better grades than students that were entered at the end of the year.
Because OFQUAL wants to end grade inflation, it said exam results or outcomes must be comparable with those of previous years. That's hard to do with a new, partly modular test, where students have done some assessments in spring and got those grades, and then done a final exam.
Well, the whole comparable outcomes approach is based on essentially rationing the number of top grades, and you can only do that once you see the full picture of every candidate's performance. And the problem is that with a modular system you don't see all that until the end, but you've already awarded some of the grades on the way. So I think it's pretty hard to do that without some kind of adjustment like what we've seen. You'd hope it wouldn't be quite on the scale that we've seen, but I don't think it's really credible that you can get rid of it altogether.
If you're a victim of this adjustment, it's hard to understand.
It's pretty clear that it's not us that's really the problem. It's mainly because they've suddenly changed the grade boundaries and then marked us down.
Someone could have missed a C by 1 mark. Whereas,
Like you?
yeah, but someone who done it in January could have just gotten a C by 1 mark, but they got the same exact marks as me.
OFQUAL's decision effectively rewards schools who put pupils in early to sit their GCSE English exam. It's ironic because Education Secretary Michael Gove has said this is a practice he wants to end. He would like all students sitting one exam all together in the summer.
There is a basic issue of fairness here that calls into question the credibility of the way the system is being run. It cannot be right that you'll have 2 students with similar quality of work, one of whose work is put in January, they get a C, the other one whose work is put in the summer, they get a D. And it isn't just a notional issue, this affects life chances, it affects the ability to go on to college, to 6th form.
It also makes comparisons between schools much less meaningful than they normally are, because schools are being judged on different sets of grade boundaries.
It makes a mockery of the league tables.
It makes a mockery of the league tables. They become meaningless unless you actually know when a school entered children for the English GCSE.
OFQUAL's offering November resits. Its inquiry is over. Head teachers are furious and still threatening legal action.
Sancha Berg. Well, in our Birmingham studio now is the Chief Regulator of OFQUAL, Glenys Stacey. Glenys Stacey, why is it that for someone whose job it is to enforce standards across the board, you've ended up talking today simply about the January candidates just getting a lucky break?
We're doing that because we've looked quite closely at the concerns that have been expressed to us very quickly, thankfully, from schools and colleges. As you said in your earlier piece, there are a good number of different units or modules now underpinning GCSEs, and we've managed to pin the problem down, if you like, to just a handful of units. Some of them were sat in January and some in June. Now, we've looked very closely at the awarding and the grade boundary setting for those units in all of the exam boards. We have looked at the professional judgment of the expert examiners there, and we can see that in June, when most of the candidates sat these papers, the material there was sound. Examiners were able to use the material to set their judgment, and they were able to use a lot of data and information to make sure that their judgments were right.
Yeah, but the point is the comparison between the marking and the results in June and in January. How is it acceptable that luck played a part in a system in a country like ours?
Yes, if I can come to that. When these units were first sat in January, first of all, very few students sat them. So if we look at AQA, for example, the biggest provider for English, only 2 out of every 100 of their students actually sat them in January. So what you had there were professional examiners again looking at the material, but they had precious little to go on. And they were new qualifications as well, so they were setting standards without really a past history to go on. And we know, having spoken with experts, that's particularly difficult in English.
And I'm sure you can find all sorts of reasons that all of this has happened, but the fact of the matter is you accept that the system you preside over is not a fair system. It has not been fair to all 16-year-olds who sat GCSE English this year.
Well, our job as a regulator is to make sure that standards are right, and we don't just have to do it for this year. We have to.
Is it a fair system to everyone who sat the exam this year?
We have to do it as compared to last year and next year and years following, and we have to make sure that standards are right overall, and we have done that.
Is it fair to everyone who sat the exam this year? It's just simple yes or no.
It is as fair as it can be, but if I can say that some solutions are on the way, we've spoken about the complexity of it and about these modular approaches, and we are moving away from that. So we are moving to linear examinations and assessments from now on.
So would you like to apologise to those who sat the exam in June and were marked more harshly than their counterparts 6 months earlier?
What I would like to say to those people who sat the exams in June is that we have looked very closely to see if there is anything wrong with your grades, and there isn't. The grades are right, but Nevertheless, we think that you have experienced quite a lot of anxiety and uncertainty. We don't think that's right, and we're very pleased that exam boards are offering you the opportunity to resit.
You would like to apologise to them.
I would certainly say that I think things could have gone better for them, and they haven't really been helped by the complexity of the system and also by the expectations that have been set for them.
So they have been unlucky then. Luck has been an unfortunate part of a system that actually should be about fairness right across the board.
They have had proper grades awarded in June. The people that were lucky were the precious few, if you like, who took these units in January.
OK, so if the ones in June, if their results are correct and if you stand by those results, then actually if you look at the fact that it's the first fall in 24 years of GCSE, then those summer GCSE English candidates were less intelligent than any of those in the previous 24 years?
No, they're not. What's happened here is until this time, we used to have 2 English qualifications. There was a change a couple of years ago. This is the first time the exams have really come to full fruition. They are completely different now. They're 3 qualifications. So the qualifications have changed, and also the candidature has changed. Some candidates have gone to IGCSE, for example. So what examiners are trying to do is make sure that the same standard is maintained through change. And can I just say here, there's a really important point for the future, that when qualifications change like this, it is very, very difficult for examiners to keep standards maintained.
OK, so again, we go back to this rather unfortunate situation then, that the ones this summer were unlucky, that they happened to be summer GCSE English students in 2012.
It's not that they were unlucky, because they have been studying these qualifications for 2 years and they came out with the right grades. The issue is that the way the system works, when a few candidates only took the units earlier in January, it was very difficult to get the standards right, and it looked like they were right at the time when those professionals were doing it.
This story is not over, is it, as far as you're concerned? Are you preparing for legal action? Because that's certainly the threat that's being talked about in a very concrete way today.
Yes, I've heard that, and of course, you know, if that's going to happen, it's going to happen. What I will say, though, again, is that we do have to maintain standards for last year, this year, next year, and so on. We really can't waver or change because a few standards, or a few students rather, got lucky in January.
OK, Glenys Stacey, thanks very much for being with us from Birmingham. Well, Anthony Selden is Master of Wellington College and Kenny Frederick is Principal of George Green Comprehensive School on the Isle of Dogs in East London. And I know you've seen this firsthand with your students this year. What do you think of Glenys Stacey's explanation?
I'm appalled. I'm absolutely furious, as indeed are hundreds of head teachers up and down the country. This is really not going to end here, and there will be legal challenges. This is a human story. There are youngsters there are most vulnerable, those, you know, at the CD borderlines, those in disadvantaged communities that have suffered here, and their whole life chances. Luck has nothing to do with it, and this has nothing to do with standards. It's about making things fit according to whatever.
Well, Stacey says that there are always difficulties when you change a system like this, and essentially these are teething problems.
Well, that's not the pupils' fault, is it? The youngsters, the schools, everybody has done. We've followed exactly what we were asked to do. We've checked throughout. You know, the nonsense about luck and about sitting the exams in January. My pupils did the exam in January, which was 40% of the mark. They did their speaking and listening tests and their controlled assessments, and they put those forward in June. So you have the same students being marked under 2 different systems. This cannot be right, and it's not acceptable.
Well, Anthony Selden, I mean, you've been talking for years, very disparagingly, about grade inflation. So are you pleased? Do you see this as the system correcting itself?
Well, I think it is a good thing that the endless rise in grades year on year has come to an end after 24 years. And I think it's a good thing for many reasons. I think it will restore confidence to the system from universities and from employers and from the general public that the grade A's really do mean what they say. And my school takes the International Baccalaureate that's had 0 grade inflation for 40 years. You can have that and maintain standards. So that was inevitable. But I think it's really appalling the way that it's happened, and it's terribly sad for these children who really feel that a big injustice has been done to them. I think it's very sad for the teachers in those schools and the schools themselves who really cling on these grades. They're so important to the children for entry into the sixth form and entry into whatever jobs they might go on to do, and for university and for the schools, the way they're judged by the government. So, and I think that the solution of this November reset seems to be an admission that OFQUAL got it wrong anyway.
They're being offered the chance for a reset.
And what's that going to help? It's going to be so hard.
Kenny Frederick, why do you think, though, this is happening right now? I mean, the comparable outcome system was a new system. I mean, Michael Gove has said that the exam boards make independent decisions. What do you think?
Well, I'm sorry, Michael Gove says that. Indeed, OFQUAL said that. I don't believe it, and I've not met a head teacher yet who does believe it, because I think the exam boards have been indirectly certainly affected by the talk about raising standards and so on. I mean, can I come back to the point about resitting in November? It seems to me that neither OFQUAL or the exam boards actually understand how a GCSE works. You can't just resit it in September or in November, because you have completely different controlled assessments. Children have to be taught, have to be prepared, have to be supervised, when they can be actually all over
their lives may have moved on.
It is not possible. They don't understand how schools work and how important this is. It's clear to me that OFQUAL do not understand the processes and the way that children are tracked from the minute they leave primary school to the end game. Raise Online, which is the database of which we're all judged on, will now be a nonsense. The head teachers here preparing, as I am myself, for Ofsted in the autumn term, and our data is just completely up the creek. And it's nonsense.
Well, let me just go back to the point then about the exam boards. Anthony Selden, what do you think of the suggestion? And it's believed by very, very many people that there has been an element of political influence, if not interference.
Well, who knows? I don't know what the answer is, but I very much doubt that Michael Gove directly had any influence on OFQUAL. I think that was OFQUAL myself. My judgment is that was OFQUAL reaching their own decision about what was right, but doing it in a very naive and insensitive way. And the fact you have so many outraged teachers who are often supportive of government policy, supportive of the whole drift, as is Kenny, who's done remarkable work in her school to raise standards, people who are appalled by this, shows that there was a lack of sensitivity, a lack of preparation, because if this new system was going to be that much harder to get these CE
or a lack
grades.
Of competence. Are OFQUAL good enough to be doing the very important job of regulating the exam boards?
Well, we should have been prepared for it. Shocks should not have been allowed to have happened. We should have been prepared for it, and they've upset a lot of very decent, hard-working teachers, heads, schools, and above all, the candidates, the students themselves. And, it needn't have happened.
Kenny Frederick, is OFQUAL up to the job, do you think? What does it say about them?
I personally have no confidence. I really have no confidence at all. They had to be forced into this investigation. The initial reaction was there was no problem. And it was only in response to the unions, the NAHT, and unions like that actually made them do this investigation. It's been very quick, and it will not lie there, because I think when we go back to school on Monday, we will be gathering the views of parents and the community who certainly will not be happy with this. And this is not going to end here.
Kenny Frederick, Anthony Selden, thanks very much to you both.